What's up, everybody? Rob here, back with another episode of me just talking about stuff. And this week, I want to talk about some Kaladesh Remastered cards that are gonna, in my opinion, completely change the landscape of Historic. This set is a combination of Kaladesh and Aether Revolts, and basically all they kind of did was trim it down to make the draft format a little tighter and more fun, and they also didn't include any of the cards that are already banned in Pioneer. This is clearly just a way for them to get closer and closer to having Pioneer on Arena, which is super exciting for me because I want all the formats. And this is once again just going to make Historic just stand out so much more from Standard, which is even more exciting. I mean, having two completely different formats on Arena is so exciting, and I'm so excited they're actually supporting Historic more. And oh boy, there's a lot of good cards coming, and let's just talk about some. First off, let's talk about Winding Constrictor. Now, Winding Constrictor played a big role in a ton of different decks that used all different kinds of counters, whether that's the new energy counter that's coming back to Arena or just +1/+1 counters. Winding Constrictor is going to be a huge role in any deck like that. Combined with Conclave Mentor and, Luminarch Aspirant, I want to say. I think there could definitely be a pretty robust +1/+1 counter deck in Historic. There's probably some more kind of tinkering and stuff that has to get done to make sure your board just doesn't get wiped, and if you can actually build up a big enough board fast enough. But there's a lot of pieces for a deck like that to be really, really powerful. And I think Winding Constrictor is definitely going to be a key part in that. And it's also just a okay mid-range card if like some kind of mid-rangey energy card is. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's pretty much just going to be in a counters type deck, but Winding Constrictor is super fun, and I'm excited to brew around with it. It's also an uncommon, so you're not going to have to be wasting too many wild cards, which is another key thing I look at when, making lists like this. Another couple of cards I'm pretty excited to brew around are all the cheap vehicles and artifact creatures in combination with things like Tempered Steel and Forsaken Monument, because I think with the release of Kaladesh, these like artifact decks are going to have a whole bunch of tools. And just to name a few, we've got like Bomac Courier, which is a really aggressive 1-drop with haste. I mean, when you have Tempered Steel and stuff, like it can come down as a 5/5 late in the game. And if you splash red, it also has a whole other slew of utility to do in your deck, which is very exciting. We also have Chief of the Foundry as just another lord for these type of decks. It costs 3 mana, so I don't know if that's kind of something you want to do, or if the other kind of pump effects are just strictly better. But it's another tool at your disposal, which is pretty exciting. Not to mention we have things like Metallic Mimic and Scrap Heap Scrounger. That's a hard one to say. Scrap Heap Scrounger coming to the format, which I think are going to serve more in different decks, but they're artifact creatures, and you can just throw them in this deck too. And they're constructs, which go along with like Karn and all these other. There's a lot of synergy starting to build up, and it's getting me pretty excited. But speaking of those last two cards, Metallic Mimic, I'm pretty excited to throw into the Humans deck I've been working with. You can check my video out where I made a Black-White Humans deck in Historic, and I think Metallic Mimic could also just help, pump your team up. Until we get Thalia's Lieutenant, we don't have like a really big lordy type effect for that deck, but I think Metallic Mimic could serve a pretty good role in that. And Scrap Heap Scrounger is just an all-star in aggressive decks. Mono Black Aggro is like one of the best decks in Pioneer, and we're almost at the point where all of those cards are going to be legal in Historic, and I think Scrap Heap Scrounger is just guaranteed to play a role in that. Not to mention Fatal Push, which is coming back. Fatal Push is going to be in every deck that can run black. It is the best removal by far you can play in the Historic format going forward. Yes, if things start to get a little more expensive, you're going to want to trim that stuff down. You're not going to play a ton of Fatal Push, but it's played in Modern, it's played in Pioneer. Historic is at a power level now where you're going to want to play cheap removal like that. And yeah, I guess hitting Revolt is going to be a little trickier with no fetch lands, but I mean, we got Fable Passage. I don't think it's going to be that hard to hit stuff. And also, there's just a lot of 2-drops you want to kill. One of the more janky cards that I had a lot of fun playing in the past, and I'm hoping to somehow make a transition to Historic, is Electrostatic Pummeler. And if you're not familiar with this, it played a lot like Infect, where you get a bunch of energy, and you just pump in a bunch of pump spells, and you try to win really fast in like 1 or 2 hits. And there's a lot of really good pump spells in Historic. So I think kind of having those all together and combined with Blossoming Defense, which is also back into the format, you can protect it. And oh man, it's just, I'm so excited for this set to come out. You have no idea. There's so many awesome cards that are just gonna, they can like hold decks together on their own, but there's just such a big card pool in Historic now that I think, oh man, it's going to be such a good format. It's already such a fun format, but this is just going to blow the whole thing wide open. I'm so excited. Speaking of like black-white humans deck that I made before, Glint Sleeve Siphoner is back in the format, which I think could be a very key piece as a way of just redundant card draw. The black-white humans deck, I've noticed, it can kind of flood and just you don't have much else. I mean, you got Militia Buglers to kind of try to refill your hand, but that's kind of the only source of card advantage. So having Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and then there's probably like, I don't know, if you want to throw in your Ether Hubs, just other, convenient ways to get energy. I think it could do a lot of good work. And if it doesn't do good work in that deck, I mean, combine it with Winding Constrictor, maybe have some kind of countery mid-range deck, green-black, Abzan. I think there's something there. But Glint Sleeve Siphoner was very powerful back in the day in like the blue-black mid-range decks, which could also come back. But I'm thinking, let's take advantage of the fact that it's a human. It's also a rogue, so there's that too. There's another tribe that card could do a lot of good stuff in. So definitely keep an eye on that. We also have a bunch of really powerful Planeswalkers come into the format. And by a bunch, I mean, there's two that I really want to talk about. One is Nissa Vital Force, which it's a 5-mana Planeswalker. It's kind of your old school Planeswalker where it's not completely broken, but it is a very good source of just advantage. You can beat down with lands, which is always good. And I've used this card as kind of a one of in kind of the like green-black Delirium style decks, either in the sideboard or in the main deck. It does a lot of good work, and I think it's going to serve a similar purpose in Historic. But Chandra, Torch of Defiance, now that is a Planeswalker. That card shows up pretty much everywhere it's legal, except, Legacy and Vintage and stuff. It's probably not quite up to the power level, but I think it could power just big red decks, Mardu decks, Rakdos mid-range decks, Jund decks. Any just mid-range red deck is gonna play Chandra. It does damage, it does card advantage, it adds mana for like burn spells and stuff. This card is it is so good as just a format. This is what I wish Planeswalkers were, like Nissa and Chandra. They come down and they make a big impact, but they're beatable and they're not 3 mana and they don't make instants impossible. And there's just, they're fun to play and play against, and they don't make me want to die inside. So glad to see powerful Planeswalkers like that come. And of course, we can't talk about Kaladesh without mentioning vehicles coming into the format. Yes, there are vehicles that are legal and Historic, but they're all trash and nobody would ever play them. I don't even think I've drafted many of the ones that are legal. But we're getting things like Heart of Kiran and Ethersphere Harvester. That's the name. It's the one that gives things lifelink, and it's good in the sideboard. But Heart of Kiran, if you're familiar, is just a great attacker. It's got vigilance. It gets through sweepers. It always has a home in those kind of beefy, stompy style aggro decks as a way to just survive past a Wrath of God or something like that, and then you can just attack the next turn if you have a creature. So really good role players. Obviously, Smuggler's Copter, pre-banned, not coming out. Whatever, I guess we don't need it, but that card is busted, so having these two other very, very good vehicles coming to the format is definitely going to make a big impact. And lastly, I want to talk about the card that I think is going to make the absolute biggest impact on Historic, and that is SRAM, Senior Artificer. So SRAM is already a key component to the black-white Auras deck in Pioneer, but in Historic, you also have Core Spirit Dancer. So combine those two together, and you are going to be drawing an absolute crap ton of cards. You are going to be able to just take these black, white, and green, white, maybe even an Abzan or blue, white. There are so many of these kind of artifact decks based around Core Spirit Dancer already in the format that adding SRAM is just going to put those decks, in my opinion, to tier 1. I don't know if they'll be the best deck in the format, but they are 100% going to be there, and they're going to be in the top tier. We saw the mono-white Aros deck do really good. Now imagine throwing a SRAM in there. It's just such a huge upgrade. It's insane. And I think from day one, if you want to make a big impact in Historic and if you want to get up the ladder, I think crafting 4 SRAM is kind of like a no-brainer, especially if you've been playing any of these Aura decks already. Like you already have the Spear Dancers, you got all of your auras and whatever the hell you're playing in those decks. Just get the SRAMs, you're going to be drawing cards, and it's going to be worth it, trust me. You're going to like that. Well, those are the cards I think are going to make a huge impact on Historic. And if anybody else has ones that I missed or some obvious ones, I didn't include like the Gear Hulks. I know there's so many cards in this set that can be good, but I just picked the ones that I like the most and am most excited to play with. So yes, please leave a comment below with what you think is going to make the biggest impact on Historic. And yeah, what have you got? Like 3 or 4 days or something crazy? I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Thank you.